Hello, fellow sapiens, and welcome to Boring Homo. I'm really glad you found your way here, settling into this quiet corner of the world where we can let our minds drift back through the vast corridors of time, where the echoes of our earliest ancestors still whisper through the darkness of prehistory. I'm so glad you're here, ready to embark on this gentle journey that will carry us across millions of years, through the long twilight hours of human becoming, when our species first learned to hold light in trembling hands and push back against the absolute sovereignty of night. There's something deeply soothing about imagining those first moments when our distant relatives discovered they could capture fire, could hold it close like a warm companion in the endless dark that had ruled Earth for so long before conscious minds arrived to witness its beauty. Tonight, we'll travel together through that profound transformation, feeling our way back to a time when the simple act of lighting a torch was nothing less than a revolution that would reshape the very fabric of existence on this planet. When humanity took its first tentative steps toward becoming the architects of their own destiny, rather than merely passengers on the journey of natural selection. Imagine for a moment the weight of that discovery, the profound shift that occurred when our ancestors realized they could carry the sun's power in their own hands, could extend the gift of light beyond the boundaries that had seemed immutable since the beginning of time itself. In those flickering flames, dancing against the vast canvas of prehistoric night, lay the seeds of everything we would eventually become, every city that would rise, every book that would be written, every song that would be sung around fires, both literal and metaphorical, for millennia to come. Picture, if you will, the Earth as it was 2 million years ago, a world where darkness held dominion over every living thing, where the rhythm of day and night dictated the boundaries of possibility with an iron certainty that had never been challenged. The sun would rise, casting its golden light across vast savannas, where early hominids moved in small groups, their lives contained within the natural cycle of illumination and shadow. And then the sun would set, bringing with it a darkness so complete, so absolute, that it wrapped around every living creature like a heavy blanket, forcing all activity to cease, all exploration to end, all dreams to wait for dawn. In this ancient world, our ancestors lived as all other creatures lived, bound by the tyranny of natural light, their lives unfolding in perfect synchronization with the celestial rhythms that had governed all existence since the first dawn broke over the young Earth. Their days began with the first pale glow on the horizon, that magical moment when the darkness began to retreat, and the world slowly emerged from shadow like a photograph developing in slow motion, revealing the familiar landscape that had been hidden just moments before. And then, as inevitably as the tide, the sun would set, bringing with it a darkness so complete, so absolute, that it wrapped around every living creature like a heavy blanket, forcing all activity to cease, all exploration to end, all dreams to wait for dawn. During those long hours of prehistoric night, when silence settled over the landscape like a gentle benediction, our ancestors would huddle together for warmth and protection, listening to the mysterious sounds that echoed through the darkness, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures, the rustling of leaves in evening breezes, the occasional crack of a branch that might signal either prey or predator moving through the shadows. They knew fire, of course, but only as a wild and dangerous force that swept across grasslands in terrifying displays of destructive power, or as the distant glow of lightning-struck trees burning in the night, beautiful and untouchable as stars, a reminder of forces far beyond their control or understanding. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from. So, drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Alright, let's head back to this primordial world where everything was about to change. The transformation didn't happen overnight, of course, but unfolded across countless generations like a dream slowly becoming real, like the gradual recognition of a melody that has been playing softly in the background for so long that you suddenly realize it has always been there, waiting to be heard. Our ancestors gradually discovered that fire could be more than just a force of destruction, that it could become a tool, a companion, a bridge between the world of day and the world of night, a faithful servant that would obey their commands and extend their capabilities far beyond what nature had originally intended. Somewhere in the depths of prehistoric time, perhaps around a lightning-struck tree that continued to smolder long after the storm had passed, sending thin columns of smoke spiraling up toward the stars like prayers written in the language of heat and light. Or beside a natural gas seep that burned with mysterious consistency through seasons and years, one of our ancient relatives made a discovery that would echo through all of human history. They learned not just to observe fire from a safe distance, but to approach it, to study its behavior, to understand the delicate balance of fuel and oxygen that kept it alive, and most remarkably of all, to realize that this wild force could be tamed, domesticated, made to serve human purposes in ways that would transform the very nature of existence on Earth. They learned to tend fire, to feed it with carefully chosen branches and dried grasses, to coax it back to life when it threatened to die, to keep it alive through the long hours of darkness, when previously all human activity had simply stopped, waiting for the sun's return like flowers closing their petals until morning. This wasn't just a practical breakthrough, though it certainly was that, extending the usable hours of each day and providing warmth and protection from the nocturnal predators that prowled the edges of human settlements. But it was something far more profound, a fundamental shift in humanity's relationship with the natural world and with the very concept of limitation itself. The mastery of fire represented the first time in Earth's history that a species had consciously decided to alter the rules of the game, to refuse the constraints that evolution had placed upon all previous life, to say with quiet determination that the boundaries of the possible were not fixed and immutable, but could be pushed back, expanded, redefined through the application of intelligence and will. When our ancestors first carried burning branches from their carefully tended fires, when they first held aloft those primitive torches and watched the light push back against the darkness, they were doing more than illuminating their immediate surroundings. They were announcing to the universe that conscious beings had arrived on Earth, beings who would not accept the boundaries that nature had set, who would find ways to extend their influence beyond the narrow confines of daylight, who would begin the long process of reshaping their environment to suit their needs and desires. The torch, in all its humble simplicity, represented humanity's first great rebellion against the natural order, the first time our species said no to the limitations that had constrained all previous life on Earth. With fire in hand, our ancestors could explore caves that had never known light, could work on tools and artwork long after sunset, could gather in circles around warming flames to share stories and knowledge, to plan and dream, and imagine possibilities that extended far beyond the immediate requirements of survival. But perhaps most importantly, the mastery of fire marked the beginning of human culture as we understand it, the moment when our species began to accumulate knowledge and pass it down through generations in ways that would eventually lead to language, to art, to complex societies, and ultimately to the sophisticated civilizations that would arise tens of thousands of years later. Every time we flip a light switch, every time we start a car, every time we power up a computer, we are participating in an unbroken chain of innovation that began with that first torch held high against the prehistoric night. The journey we're about to take together will carry us through this remarkable transformation, following the flickering light of human ingenuity as it grows from a single flame to the brilliant illumination of entire cities, watching as our species learns not just to survive in the world, but to actively reshape it, to bend the forces of nature to human will, to create something entirely new under the sun. We'll witness the rise of the first tools, the development of language, the formation of communities, and the gradual emergence of the complex societies that would eventually give birth to agriculture, writing, and all the other innovations that define human civilization. Along the way, we'll explore some fascinating alternative theories about humanity's past, considering the possibility that our ancestors achieved levels of sophistication much earlier than traditionally believed, that ancient civilizations may have possessed knowledge and technologies that we're only beginning to rediscover, that the story of human development may be far more complex and mysterious than the linear progression typically presented in textbooks. We'll contemplate the role that catastrophic events may have played in shaping human history, from massive volcanic eruptions that altered global climate to asteroid impacts that may have reset the trajectory of human development, forcing our ancestors to rebuild their knowledge and technologies from scattered fragments of lost wisdom. We'll consider the intriguing evidence for advanced engineering in ancient monuments, The sophisticated astronomical knowledge demonstrated by prehistoric peoples, and the tantalizing hints that human civilization may be much older and more cyclical than we've traditionally assumed. But through it all, we'll maintain our focus on that central theme of light conquering darkness, of human consciousness gradually expanding its influence over the natural world, of the steady accumulation of knowledge and capability that would eventually lead our species from huddling around primitive campfires to launching rockets toward the stars. The torch that our ancestors first lifted against the prehistoric night was the beginning of an unbroken chain of innovation that continues to this day, each new discovery building upon the achievements of countless previous generations, each breakthrough opening new possibilities that our ancestors could never have imagined. So settle in comfortably, let your breathing slow and deepen, let your mind relax and drift like leaves floating downstream, as we begin this long, slow journey through the corridors of deep time, feeling our way back to those pivotal moments when humanity first began to reshape the world, when consciousness first challenged the ancient patterns of Earth, when the simple act of lighting a fire became the first step in a transformation that would ultimately change the face of the planet itself. The story we're about to explore together is ultimately the story of all of us, the epic tale of how our species learned to push back against the darkness and create its own light, its own warmth, its own vision of what life on Earth could become. In the chapters that follow, we'll witness the slow accumulation of wisdom and technique that transformed scattered bands of fire tenders into the architects of civilizations. We'll explore the mysteries and alternative possibilities that conventional history often overlooks, and we'll contemplate the profound implications of humanity's first great technological revolution. But for now, in this quiet moment before our journey truly begins, take a moment to appreciate the miracle of consciousness itself. The remarkable fact that matter organized itself into patterns capable of wonder, of curiosity, of the desire to understand and reshape the world, and that those patterns eventually learned to hold fire in their hands like captured starlight, bringing illumination to corners of existence that had never known anything but darkness. As we drift deeper into the realm of deep time, where the very air seems to shimmer with the weight of ages past, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of one of the most extraordinary transformations in the history of our planet, a moment when the random dance of evolution suddenly acquired purpose, direction, and the first faint glimmer of what we might recognize as conscious intention. The story of fire and humanity is also the story of consciousness itself, of the remarkable emergence of minds capable of not just responding to their environment but actively reshaping it, of creatures who could look up at the stars and wonder what they were, who could see lightning strike a tree and imagine capturing that power for themselves. Picture, if you will, the landscape of human consciousness as it existed 2 million years ago, a terrain as different from our modern mental world as the surface of an alien planet would be from a familiar garden, yet containing within its alien contours all the potential that would eventually bloom into the rich complexity of modern human awareness. Our ancestors possessed minds that were already remarkable by the standards of all previous life on Earth, brains that had grown larger and more complex than those of their evolutionary cousins, neural networks that could solve problems with startling ingenuity, remember solutions across seasons and years, and even pass knowledge from one individual to another through the primitive gestures and vocalizations that would eventually evolve into the magnificent tapestry of human language. These early minds represented something entirely unprecedented in the 4 billion-year history of life on Earth. Consciousness that had begun to turn inward upon itself, awareness that was not only aware but aware of being aware, cognitive systems that had started to develop what we might call a sense of self, a primitive but growing understanding that the experiencing subject was somehow separate from, and yet intimately connected to the experienced world. But these early minds existed in a state that we might find almost unimaginably limited, bound by the immediate demands of survival, focused entirely on the present moment and the concrete challenges it presented, living in what we might call an eternal now, where past and future existed only as dim shadows at the edges of immediate experience. They could recognize patterns, certainly, could learn to associate the rustle of grass with the presence of prey or predator, could remember which fruits were safe to eat and which would bring sickness or death. could even engage in simple forms of planning and foresight, but they lived in a mental universe that extended only as far as direct experience could reach, where abstract thinking and long-term planning were still impossibilities waiting to be born. Their consciousness was like a spotlight, illuminating only the immediate circle of present concern, unable to cast its beam very far into either past or future, unable to conceive of possibilities that lay beyond the horizon of direct sensory experience, unable to engage in the kind of counterfactual thinking that allows modern humans to imagine alternative scenarios, to consider what might have been, or what could be under different circumstances. The mastery of fire changed everything about this ancient mental landscape, not in a single dramatic moment, but through a gradual transformation that unfolded across thousands of generations like a flower blooming in slow motion, each small breakthrough in understanding building upon the discoveries of those who came before, each new technique or insight opening doorways to possibilities that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth. When our ancestors learned to tend fire, to feed it and nurture it through the long hours of darkness, they were engaging in humanity's first experiment with what we might call technology, the deliberate manipulation of natural forces to achieve desired outcomes, the conscious reshaping of reality according to human intention, rather than merely accepting whatever nature happened to provide. This was a profound departure from the way all previous life had interacted with the environment, a revolutionary new approach that required forms of mental processing that evolution had never before been called upon to develop, cognitive capabilities that pushed the boundaries of what biological intelligence could achieve. But more than that, they were exercising mental capabilities that had never been needed before, forms of thinking that went far beyond the immediate response to environmental stimuli that had characterized all previous cognition. To keep a fire alive required planning, the ability to anticipate future needs and prepare for them, to understand cause and effect in ways that extended far beyond the simple association of events. It required the development of what psychologists would later call executive function, the capacity to hold multiple ideas in mind simultaneously, to suppress immediate impulses in favor of long-term goals, to engage in the kind of abstract reasoning that would eventually give birth to mathematics, philosophy, and science. Consider the profound cognitive revolution that occurred when our ancestors first realized they could carry fire from place to place, that the flames dancing in their carefully tended hearths were not permanently bound to a single location, but could be transported, shared, divided, and multiplied like seeds being scattered to grow new fires in distant places. This breakthrough required a form of thinking that had never existed before in the history of consciousness. The ability to conceive of fire not as a specific phenomenon tied to a particular place and time, but as a transferable property, something that could be abstracted from its immediate context and applied to new situations. A concept that could be mentally manipulated and combined with other concepts to generate entirely novel possibilities. The implications of this cognitive leap cannot be overstated, for it represented the birth of what philosophers and cognitive scientists would later recognize as one of the defining characteristics of human intelligence, the capacity for what we call generalization, the ability to extract general principles from specific instances and apply those principles to new and unfamiliar situations. In this moment of realization, we can see the first glimmerings of what would eventually become humanity's greatest gift, and perhaps its greatest curse, the capacity for symbolic thinking, the ability to treat one thing as representing another, to manipulate mental models of reality rather than being limited to direct interaction with the physical world. The fire that our ancestors carried in their primitive torches was no longer just fire. It had become a symbol of human agency, a representation of the species' growing power to reshape the natural world according to its own designs and desires. This symbolic revolution had implications that extended far beyond the practical benefits of portable light and heat, though those benefits were certainly transformative in their own right, allowing human communities to expand their activities into previously inaccessible environments, to explore caves and dense forests, to extend their hunting and gathering activities well beyond the constraints imposed by natural light cycles. More importantly, the ability to think symbolically opened the door to forms of communication and knowledge transmission that would eventually revolutionize human society. When our ancestors gathered around their fires in the long hours between sunset and dawn, they were not just sharing warmth and protection from nocturnal predators. They were creating the world's first schools, the first universities, the first centers of learning where knowledge could be accumulated, refined, and passed from one generation to the next. The flickering flames that danced before their eyes became the focus for storytelling sessions that would gradually evolve into the complex mythologies, oral histories, and cultural traditions that define human civilization. But perhaps most remarkably of all, the mastery of fire seems to have triggered changes in human neurology itself, adaptations that occurred not over millions of years through the slow process of genetic evolution, but over mere thousands of generations through the mysterious mechanisms of epigenetic change and neuroplasticity. Recent research in paleoanthropology and cognitive archaeology suggests that the regular use of fire may have fundamentally altered the structure and function of human brains, promoting the development of larger prefrontal cortices, more complex neural networks, and enhanced capacity for abstract reasoning. Some scientists have proposed that the act of tending fire, with its requirements for sustained attention, long-term planning, and precise motor control, served as a form of cognitive training that pushed human brains toward greater complexity and sophistication. The need to maintain optimal fuel-to-oxygen ratios, to anticipate when fires would need feeding, to coordinate fire-tending activities among multiple individuals. All of these challenges demanded forms of mental processing that were unprecedented in the natural world. Others have suggested that the social interactions that developed around communal fires played an even more important role in driving cognitive evolution, creating selective pressures that favored individuals with enhanced communication skills, greater emotional intelligence, and more sophisticated abilities to cooperate and collaborate with others. The fire circle became humanity's first laboratory for developing the complex social technologies that would eventually make possible the creation of large-scale societies, governments, and civilizations. There are also intriguing theories about the role that altered states of consciousness may have played in early human development, possibilities that conventional archaeology often overlooks, but that deserve serious consideration as we try to understand the full complexity of our species' emergence. The hypnotic effect of staring into flames, the changes in brain chemistry that occur during prolonged exposure to smoke and heat, the natural tendency for rhythmic activities like fire tending to induce trance-like states, all of these factors may have contributed to the development of enhanced creativity, spiritual awareness, and innovative thinking among our ancestors. Some researchers have even proposed that the regular use of psychoactive plants, many of which would have been readily available to our fire-using ancestors, and whose effects would have been amplified by the altered consciousness induced by fire ceremonies, may have played a crucial role in accelerating human cognitive evolution, serving as chemical catalysts that temporarily dissolved the rigid boundaries of ordinary perception and allowed consciousness to explore new territories of possibility. While such theories remain controversial and difficult to prove through conventional archaeological methods, they offer fascinating insights into alternative pathways by which human consciousness might have developed its unique characteristics, suggesting that the evolution of human awareness may have been far more complex and multifaceted than traditional accounts would have us believe. The interplay between fire, consciousness, and perhaps even naturally occurring psychoactive compounds may have created a feedback loop of cognitive enhancement, where each element amplified the effects of the others, creating conditions that were uniquely favorable to the rapid development of higher-order thinking skills, creative problem-solving abilities, and the kind of open-ended curiosity that would eventually drive our species to explore every corner of the planet and reach toward the stars themselves. As we continue our journey through the corridors of deep time, watching the slow transformation of human minds, from purely reactive systems to the incredibly sophisticated cognitive machines that would eventually produce art, music, literature, and science, we begin to see how the simple act of lighting a fire was really the first step in a process that would fundamentally alter the nature of intelligence itself on our planet. The flames that danced before our ancestors' eyes were not just sources of light and heat. They were beacons, calling consciousness toward new possibilities, inviting minds to stretch beyond their previous limitations and discover capabilities that had been hidden within them all along. In the warm glow of those ancient fires, surrounded by the vast darkness of prehistoric night, our ancestors were laying the foundation for everything that would follow. Every breakthrough in human understanding, every leap forward in technological capability, every expansion of our species' influence over the natural world. The cognitive revolution that began around those early fires continues to this day, as human minds push ever further into realms of knowledge and possibility that our fire-tending ancestors could never have imagined, yet which somehow seem to have been implicit in that first moment when consciousness learned to hold light in its hands and push back against the darkness of ignorance and limitation. In the gentle embrace of our continuing journey through deep time, we find ourselves drawn to one of the most profound and transformative developments in human history, a moment when the simple act of gathering around a fire became something far more significant than mere survival strategy. Evolving into humanity's first sacred ritual, the foundational ceremony from which all subsequent religious, spiritual, and cultural practices would eventually emerge. The fire circle represents more than just a practical arrangement for sharing warmth and light. It was the birthplace of human community in its deepest sense, the original sanctuary where our ancestors first began to explore the mysteries of existence, consciousness, and their place in the vast cosmic order. Picture, if you will, the scene as it might have unfolded countless times across hundreds of thousands of years, in caves and clearings, on hillsides and riverbanks, wherever our nomadic ancestors made their temporary homes beneath the star-filled canopies of prehistoric nights that stretched endlessly above them, like vast tapestries woven from light and darkness. As the sun disappeared behind distant horizons, and the familiar world dissolved into shadow, as the temperature dropped and the sounds of daytime life gave way to the mysterious calls and movements of nocturnal creatures, small groups of early humans would gather around their carefully tended fires, forming circles that represented something far more profound than mere convenience or accident, arrangements that seemed to emerge naturally from some deep intuitive understanding of sacred geometry, of the power inherent in circular forms to create boundaries between the known and unknown, the safe and dangerous, the illuminated and the mysterious. These gatherings were not casual affairs, but followed patterns that seemed to have been remarkably consistent across different groups and geographical regions, suggesting that the human attraction to circular arrangements around fire springs from something deeper than cultural learning, perhaps from evolutionary adaptations that recognized the survival advantages of such formations, or perhaps from even more mysterious sources that we are only beginning to understand. These fire circles became humanity's first temples, sacred spaces, where the ordinary rules of daytime existence were temporarily suspended, and consciousness could explore realms of experience that were impossible under the harsh light of practical necessity. In the dancing shadows cast by flickering flames, in the hypnotic rhythm of crackling wood and the ever-changing patterns of light and darkness, our ancestors found themselves entering altered states of awareness that opened doorways to enhanced creativity, spiritual insight, and forms of understanding that transcended the limitations of purely rational thought. The transformation that occurred when humans began gathering regularly in these fire circles cannot be overstated, for it marked the beginning of what we might call the collective human mind, the first emergence of group consciousness that was somehow greater than the sum of its individual parts. When our ancestors sat together in the warm glow of their shared fires, they were not just pooling their physical resources for mutual protection and comfort. They were creating a new form of intelligence, a collaborative consciousness that could accomplish things that no individual mind could achieve alone. In these sacred circles, knowledge began to accumulate and crystallize in ways that had never been possible before in the history of life on Earth. Experiences and insights were shared, compared, refined, and woven together into increasingly sophisticated understandings of the natural world and humanity's place within it. The elder members of each group became the keepers of accumulated wisdom, living libraries of practical knowledge about everything, from the healing properties of plants to the movements of animals, from the patterns of weather to the cycles of celestial bodies, all of this information preserved and transmitted through the ancient art of storytelling that emerged naturally from the contemplative atmosphere of the fire circle. But these knowledge-sharing sessions were far more than simple information exchanges. They were ritualistic performances that engaged multiple senses and levels of consciousness simultaneously, combining spoken narrative with gesture, song, dance, and dramatic reenactment in ways that embedded learning deep within the memory and emotional centers of the brain. The flickering firelight itself became an active participant in these educational experiences, casting moving shadows that could be manipulated to illustrate stories, creating an ever-changing visual backdrop that enhanced the impact and memorability of the shared knowledge. But perhaps most remarkably of all, these gatherings around communal fires seem to have given birth to humanity's first experiments, with what we would later recognize as art, music, and ceremonial performance, creative expressions that served no obvious, practical purpose, yet seemed to fulfill some deep psychological need that our ancestors were only beginning to understand. The walls of caves illuminated by firelight became the world's first art galleries, covered with paintings and drawings that revealed sophisticated artistic sensibilities and symbolic thinking capabilities that continue to amaze and perplex researchers to this day. Recent discoveries in caves across Europe, Africa, and Asia have revealed artistic achievements that push back the timeline of human creative expression much earlier than previously thought, suggesting that our ancestors were creating sophisticated works of art, complex musical instruments, and elaborate ceremonial objects tens of thousands of years before the emergence of agriculture and settled civilization. These findings challenge conventional assumptions about the linear progression of human cultural development and suggest that the cognitive revolution triggered by fire mastery may have produced far more advanced forms of consciousness and creative expression than traditional archaeology has been willing to acknowledge. The sophistication of some of these ancient artworks is truly breathtaking, displaying techniques and aesthetic sensibilities that rival the achievements of much later civilizations, suggesting that the creative capabilities unleashed by fire circle gatherings may have reached heights that we are only now beginning to appreciate. The famous cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira, with their masterful use of natural rock contours to create three-dimensional effects and their sophisticated understanding of animal anatomy and movement, represent just the tip of an iceberg of artistic achievement that may extend much deeper into prehistory than we have previously imagined. Some researchers have proposed that the regular gathering of groups around fires, combined with the natural tendency for rhythmic activities and group singing to induce synchronized brain states, may have led to experiences of collective consciousness that our modern, individualistic minds find difficult to comprehend. In these altered states, individual identity may have temporarily dissolved into larger group awareness, creating experiences of unity and transcendence that would later be remembered and celebrated in the mythological and religious traditions that define human culture. The fire circle also served as humanity's first laboratory for developing the complex social technologies that would eventually make possible the creation of large-scale societies, governments, and civilizations. The dynamics of group interaction around a shared fire required the development of new forms of communication, cooperation, and conflict resolution, skills that had never been needed by purely individualistic creatures, but that became essential as human groups grew larger and more complex. In the intimate setting of the fire circle, our ancestors learned to navigate the delicate balance between individual needs and group welfare, to develop systems of leadership and decision-making that could coordinate collective action while respecting individual autonomy, to create social bonds strong enough to hold communities together through times of stress and hardship, while flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances and new challenges. The egalitarian nature of the fire circle, where all participants sat at roughly equal distances from the central source of light and warmth, may have established fundamental principles of human social organization that continue to influence our political and social ideals to this day. The democratic values of equality, shared decision-making, and collective responsibility that we associate with the highest achievements of human civilization may have their roots in these ancient gatherings, around prehistoric fires, where the harsh hierarchies of daytime survival gave way to more collaborative and inclusive forms of social interaction. But the influence of the fire circle extended far beyond immediate practical concerns about survival and social organization. reaching into the deepest questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and humanity's relationship with the cosmos. As our ancestors gazed into the hypnotic flames that danced before their eyes, they were engaging in what may have been humanity's first experiments with meditation, contemplation, and spiritual practice, activities that opened their minds to insights and experiences that would eventually give birth to all subsequent religious and philosophical traditions. The universal human fascination with fire, which persists to this day in our continued attraction to fireplaces, candles, and campfires, may be a deep evolutionary memory of these transformative experiences around prehistoric fire circles, an unconscious recognition that fire represents something far more significant than mere physical combustion, that it symbolizes the eternal flame of consciousness itself, the divine spark that distinguishes living awareness from inert matter. Many indigenous cultures around the world have preserved oral traditions that speak of fire as a sacred gift, a bridge between the human and divine realms, a manifestation of cosmic energy that connects all living things in a web of luminous interconnection. These traditions may represent echoes of humanity's earliest spiritual insights, memories of the profound experiences that occurred when our ancestors first learned to gather around fires and open their consciousness to realities beyond the immediate demands of physical survival. The development of language itself may have been profoundly influenced by the unique social dynamics of the fire circle, where the combination of relaxed social atmosphere, enhanced creativity, and extended periods of time for conversation created ideal conditions for the rapid evolution of increasingly sophisticated forms of communication. The storytelling traditions that emerged from these gatherings required the development of complex narrative structures, symbolic representations, and abstract concepts that pushed the boundaries of early human language far beyond simple commands and warnings into realms of poetry, metaphor, and philosophical speculation. The acoustic properties of circular arrangements around fires may have also played a crucial role in language development, creating natural amphitheaters where voices carried clearly to all participants, where the subtle modulations of tone and rhythm that give human speech its emotional richness could be appreciated and refined. The echoing effects produced by cave walls and natural rock formations would have provided feedback that encouraged experimentation with vocal techniques, leading to the development of the complex prosodic patterns that distinguish human language from all other forms of animal communication. Some linguists have suggested that the metaphorical and poetic dimensions of human language, which distinguish it so dramatically from the purely functional communication systems of other animals, may have evolved specifically in response to the creative and spiritual needs that emerged in fire circle gatherings. The human capacity for humor, irony, symbolism, and artistic expression may all be evolutionary adaptations that develop to serve the unique social and psychological functions of these ancient ceremonial gatherings. As we continue our journey through the deep history of human consciousness, following the flickering light of awareness as it expands from individual minds to collective intelligence, from practical survival skills to artistic and spiritual expression, we begin to see how the simple act of gathering around a fire became the foundation for everything that makes us distinctively human. The sacred circle of light that formed around those prehistoric fires was not just a physical arrangement, but a metaphysical template, a blueprint for human community that would be repeated and elaborated in countless forms throughout all subsequent history. In the warm glow of those ancient flames, surrounded by the vast mystery of the prehistoric night, our ancestors were laying the groundwork for cathedrals and concert halls, universities and libraries, democratic assemblies and artistic communities, all the institutions and practices that define human civilization at its highest and most noble expressions. The fire circle was where humanity first discovered that consciousness could be shared, that individual awareness could merge into something larger and more beautiful than any single mind could achieve alone, that the light of understanding could grow brighter when many flames were brought together in sacred fellowship. The legacy of these ancient gatherings continues to resonate through human culture to this day, visible in our persistent attraction to circular arrangements for important social and ceremonial occasions, from wedding rings to conference tables, from circular amphitheaters to round tables of legend and history. The archetypal power of the circle as a symbol of unity, equality, and completion seems to spring from these deep evolutionary memories of our ancestors, gathering around fires in the darkness, creating islands of light and consciousness in the vast ocean of prehistoric night, establishing patterns of human interaction that would echo through all subsequent generations and continue to shape our understanding of what it means to be human in relationship with others. As we continue our gentle drift through the vast ocean of deep time, we find ourselves approaching one of the most pivotal moments in the entire saga of human development, when our ancestors made the revolutionary leap from simply tending fires to actively creating and controlling them. When they transformed from passive recipients of natural flames to active architects of illumination, developing the first tools and techniques that would allow them to carry light wherever they wished to go. This transition represents far more than a simple technological advancement. It marks the moment when humanity truly began to assert its dominion over the natural world, when our species first demonstrated its capacity to impose human will upon the fundamental forces of nature. The journey from firekeeping to firemaking was neither quick nor simple, unfolding across countless generations like a slow dance between human ingenuity and the stubborn mysteries of combustion, each small breakthrough building upon the accumulated wisdom of those who came before, each failure teaching valuable lessons that would eventually contribute to ultimate success. Our ancestors had to develop not just the technical skills required to create fire from nothing, but also the conceptual framework necessary to understand fire as a phenomenon that could be controlled, predicted, and deliberately produced through the application of proper techniques and materials. Picture, if you will, the immense psychological transformation that occurred when our ancestors first realized that fire was not an arbitrary gift from the gods or a random accident of nature, but a predictable result of specific conditions that could be deliberately created through human action, a natural phenomenon that followed consistent laws and patterns that could be understood, learned, and reliably reproduced. This understanding required a sophisticated grasp of cause and effect relationships that extended far beyond anything that had been needed for simple fire maintenance, demanding new forms of abstract reasoning, systematic experimentation, and the kind of patient persistence that would eventually become hallmarks of human scientific thinking. The leap from passive firekeeping to active firemaking represented one of the most profound cognitive revolutions in human history, comparable perhaps to the later development of agriculture or writing in its impact on human consciousness and capability. For the first time, our ancestors were manipulating natural forces through conscious intention rather than simply responding to environmental conditions, actively imposing their will upon the physical world rather than merely adapting to whatever circumstances nature happened to provide. The development of fire-making tools represents humanity's first venture into what we might call engineering, the deliberate design and construction of devices specifically intended to manipulate natural forces for human purposes. The simple fire drill, with its carefully shaped wooden components and precisely calculated friction surfaces, embodies principles of mechanical advantage, heat generation, and material science that would not be formally understood until thousands of years later. Yet our ancestors mastered these concepts through intuitive experimentation and careful observation of natural phenomena. But the creation of portable fire tools solved only part of the challenge that faced our mobile ancestors, who needed not just the ability to create fire, but also the means to transport it safely and efficiently across long distances and through varying weather conditions. The development of the torch, that seemingly simple combination of fuel, binding materials, and a handle that could be gripped safely while flames danced at its tip, required innovations in materials science, combustion control, and ergonomic design that pushed the boundaries of prehistoric technology. The first torches were probably crude affairs, little more than bundles of dried grass or bark tied to the end of a stick. But even these primitive implements represented a quantum leap in human capability, extending the reach of fire far beyond the boundaries of established camps and hearths into previously inaccessible realms of darkness that had remained unexplored since the beginning of time. With torches in hand, our ancestors could explore deep caves that had never known light, could travel safely through forests during the dangerous hours of night, when predators prowled and familiar landmarks disappeared into shadow, could extend their hunting and gathering activities into times and places that had previously been forbidden territory. The very act of creating these first torches required innovations in multiple areas of human knowledge and skill, from understanding which materials burned most effectively, to developing techniques for securing combustible substances, to wooden handles in ways that would not compromise either the structural integrity of the torch or the safety of the person carrying it. Each successful torch represented the solution to dozens of small but crucial engineering problems, from ensuring adequate airflow to maintain combustion to preventing the flame from spreading down the handle to the user's hand. The psychological impact of portable fire technology cannot be overstated, for it fundamentally altered humanity's relationship with the natural cycles that had previously defined the boundaries of the possible. No longer were our ancestors completely dependent upon the sun for illumination. No longer were they forced to curtail all activities when darkness fell. No longer were they helpless prisoners of the day-night cycle that had constrained all previous life on Earth. The torch represented humanity's first declaration of independence from natural limitations, the initial step in a long journey toward technological mastery that continues to this day. As torch-making techniques became more sophisticated, our ancestors began experimenting with different materials and designs, discovering that various substances burned with different characteristics, that some materials produced brighter flames while others burned longer, that the way materials were combined and arranged could dramatically affect the performance of the finished torch. This experimentation led to the development of specialized torches for different purposes: long-burning torches for extended journeys, bright-burning torches for detailed work, weather-resistant torches for outdoor use in difficult conditions. The evolution of torch technology also drove innovations in other areas of human activity, creating demand for new tools and techniques for gathering, preparing, and processing the materials needed for torch construction. Our ancestors had to develop methods for selecting and harvesting the right kinds of plant fibers, for collecting and storing combustible resins and oils, for creating binding materials that could withstand the heat and stress of burning torches, for designing handles that could be gripped comfortably for extended periods without transmitting dangerous levels of heat to human hands. Perhaps most remarkably, the mastery of portable fire technology seems to have triggered a cascade of secondary innovations that transformed multiple aspects of human life and culture. The ability to carry light into previously dark spaces led to the development of more sophisticated shelter construction, as our ancestors learned to excavate and inhabit deep caves that could only be navigated safely with artificial illumination. The extended activity periods made possible by torches created opportunities for new forms of artistic expression, as cave walls illuminated by flickering flames became canvases for increasingly sophisticated paintings and engravings. The social implications of torch technology were equally profound, as the ability to create and control portable fire became a source of prestige and influence within human communities. Those individuals who mastered the complex skills required for successful torch making found themselves elevated to positions of respect and authority, becoming the keepers of crucial knowledge that could mean the difference between safety and danger, between successful exploration and dangerous fumbling in the dark. Some researchers have proposed that the development of portable fire technology may have played a crucial role in the geographic expansion of human populations, providing the technological foundation that made it possible for our ancestors to colonize new environments and explore territories that had previously been inaccessible. The ability to carry reliable sources of light and heat would have been particularly important for populations moving into colder climates, or exploring regions with limited natural sources of fire, such as areas prone to frequent rainfall or lacking in suitable combustible materials. The mastery of torch-making also had profound implications for human cognitive development, requiring forms of planning, preparation, and sequential thinking that pushed the boundaries of prehistoric mental capabilities. The creation of a successful torch demanded the ability to anticipate future needs, to gather and prepare materials in advance, to follow complex sequences of steps in the proper order, to troubleshoot problems, and make adjustments when initial attempts failed to produce desired results. There are also intriguing theories about the role that improved lighting technology may have played in the development of human language and communication. The extended periods of social interaction made possible by portable fire may have created ideal conditions for the evolution of increasingly sophisticated forms of verbal and non-verbal communication. As groups gathered around torches had more time and opportunity for the kind of complex social exchanges that drive linguistic development. The flickering, directional light produced by torches may have also influenced the development of gestural communication, as the interplay of light and shadow created new possibilities for visual signaling and the kind of hand movements that would eventually evolve into formal sign languages. The need to coordinate torch-making activities among multiple individuals would have required increasingly sophisticated forms of instruction, collaboration, and quality control that pushed the development of technical vocabulary and procedural communication. As torch technology continued to evolve, our ancestors began experimenting with more advanced designs and materials, developing slow-burning torches that could provide illumination for many hours, compact torches that could be easily carried on long journeys, specialized torches designed for specific activities like hunting, fishing, or artistic work. These innovations required increasingly sophisticated understanding of combustion chemistry, heat transfer, and materials science, laying the groundwork for the more advanced fire technologies that would eventually emerge. The development of torch-making also created the first human industries in the modern sense. As communities began to specialize in the production of fire-making tools and materials, trading their products with other groups in exchange for different goods and services, establishing networks of exchange and cooperation that would eventually evolve into the complex economic systems that characterize modern civilization. This early form of economic specialization helped to accelerate technological development by allowing individuals to focus their efforts on perfecting specific skills and techniques, rather than having to master every aspect of survival. Technology, creating conditions that favored innovation and the rapid dissemination of new ideas. The trade networks that developed around torch-making materials and fire-starting tools may have been among humanity's first experiments with long-distance commerce, as different regions possessed different resources and materials that were particularly well-suited for fire-making purposes. Groups living near sources of high-quality flint could trade their stone-knapping expertise for plant fibers and resins, produced by communities in other ecological zones, creating webs of interdependence that strengthened social bonds between distant populations and encouraged the sharing of technological innovations across wide geographical areas. The psychological and spiritual significance of the torch extended far beyond its practical applications, as portable fire became a powerful symbol of human agency, divine power, and the triumph of consciousness over the forces of darkness and chaos. Many of the world's oldest mythological and religious traditions feature torches as sacred objects, symbols of enlightenment, knowledge, and the divine spark that distinguishes living beings from inert matter. As we continue our journey through the deep history of human technological development, following the flickering flames of innovation as they spread from simple fire maintenance to sophisticated tool-making, we begin to see how the mastery of portable fire technology laid the foundation for all subsequent human achievements in engineering, science, and technology. The torch that our ancestors first lifted against the prehistoric darkness was not just a tool for producing light, it was a symbol of human potential, a declaration that conscious beings had arrived on Earth, who would not accept the limitations imposed by nature, but would find ways to transcend those limitations through the application of intelligence, creativity, and determined effort. In the warm glow of those first torches, carried through the vast darkness of prehistoric nights by hands that trembled with the weight of discovery, our ancestors were taking the initial steps on a journey that would eventually lead humanity from huddling around scattered fires to illuminating entire cities, from fumbling in caves with primitive torches to sending rockets toward distant stars, from the simple mastery of combustion to the complex technologies that define modern civilization. The light they carried was more than just flame. It was the light of consciousness itself, pushing back against the darkness of ignorance and opening pathways to possibilities that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth. As our journey through deep time carries us forward into new realms of human possibility, we find ourselves witnessing one of the most remarkable chapters in the story of our species, a period when the mastery of portable fire technology enabled our ancestors to embark upon the greatest adventure in human history, the epic migration that would eventually carry them from their African homeland to every corner of the earth, spreading the light of human consciousness across continents and into environments that had never before known the touch of rational thought. This was not merely a physical journey across geographical distances, but a profound expansion of human awareness itself, as our torch-bearing ancestors carried with them not just the practical benefits of controlled fire, but the entire accumulated wisdom of human culture, spreading seeds of civilization that would eventually bloom into the rich diversity of human societies that populate our world today. The role that fire technology played in enabling these great migrations cannot be overstated, for without the ability to create and transport reliable sources of warmth and light, human populations would have remained forever confined to the relatively narrow band of tropical and subtropical environments, where natural conditions provided adequate resources for survival. The torch and the fire-making kit became humanity's passport to the world, technological innovations that transformed our ancestors from tropical specialists into the most adaptable species that had ever existed, capable of thriving in environments ranging from Arctic tundra to desert wastes, from dense forests to high mountain ranges. Picture, if you will, the courage and determination required for those first expeditions into unknown territories, as small groups of our ancestors gathered their precious fire-making tools and portable torches, said goodbye to familiar landscapes and established communities, and set out into the vast wilderness that stretched beyond the horizons of their known world, like an endless ocean of possibility and danger. These early explorers carried with them not just the physical tools necessary for survival in harsh new environments, but also the accumulated knowledge and cultural wisdom of countless generations, the stories and songs and techniques that would allow them to maintain their human identity, even as they adapted to radically different conditions and challenges. The decision to leave familiar territories and venture into the unknown required a form of courage that we can barely imagine today, when satellite imagery and GPS systems have eliminated most of the mystery from terrestrial exploration. Our ancestors were literally walking into the darkness, guided only by the light of their torches and the accumulated wisdom of previous generations, with no way of knowing what dangers or opportunities might await them beyond the next ridge or across the next river. Each step forward was an act of faith in human capability and determination, a declaration that consciousness, armed with fire and tools, could overcome whatever obstacles the natural world might present. The expansion of human populations into temperate and eventually Arctic regions required not just portable fire technology, but also the development of entirely new categories of tools and techniques for surviving in cold environments, innovations that would never have been possible without the foundation provided by controlled fire. The ability to create and maintain fires in sub-zero temperatures, to dry wet clothing and equipment, to cook food that would otherwise be frozen solid, to create warm shelters that could protect human bodies from lethal cold. All of these capabilities depended upon the sophisticated fire technologies that our ancestors had developed during their long apprenticeship in more hospitable climates. But perhaps even more remarkably, the Great Migration seemed to have triggered an acceleration in human cultural and technological development, as the challenges of surviving in new environments pushed our ancestors to develop innovative solutions that went far beyond anything that had been needed in their ancestral homelands. The necessity of carrying fire across long distances led to improvements in torch design and fire-starting techniques, while the need to maintain fires in wet and windy conditions spurred the development of more sophisticated shelter, construction, and fire protection methods. The psychological impact of these migrations on human consciousness was equally profound, as our ancestors found themselves confronting landscapes and phenomena that had no precedent in their previous experience, forcing them to develop new ways of understanding and interpreting the natural world. The aurora borealis dancing across Arctic skies, the vast ice sheets that covered northern continents, the strange new plants and animals that inhabited distant lands. All of these encounters required expansions of human awareness and understanding that pushed the boundaries of prehistoric cognition. Some researchers have proposed that the challenges of long-distance migration may have played a crucial role in the development of human language and abstract thinking, as the need to plan extended journeys, coordinate group movements, and share information about distant territories, required forms of communication that went far beyond the immediate and concrete concerns that had previously dominated human discourse. The ability to describe places that were not directly visible, to discuss events that might occur in the future, to share memories of locations that lay many days' journey behind. All of these linguistic capabilities may have evolved in response to the unique challenges of intercontinental migration. The Great Migrations also seem to have accelerated the development of human artistic and spiritual traditions, as our ancestors found themselves overwhelmed by the beauty and mystery of the new landscapes they encountered. Landscapes that inspired new forms of creative expression and spiritual understanding. The cave paintings that mark the paths of human migration across the continents often display a sophistication and emotional depth that suggests profound encounters with the sacred dimensions of the natural world, experiences that may have been intensified by the altered states of consciousness that could result from the hardships and revelations of long-distance travel. There are also intriguing theories about the role that fire technology may have played in enabling our ancestors to survive various climate catastrophes that occurred during the period of global human expansion, events that might otherwise have driven the species to extinction, but that were instead weathered successfully through the adaptive advantages provided by controlled fire. The ability to create artificial warmth during sudden cooling periods, to cook food that might otherwise have become inedible during environmental stress, to maintain social cohesion through the unifying effects of shared fires. All of these capabilities may have been crucial for human survival during periods of rapid climate change. The expansion of human populations across diverse environments also led to the development of specialized fire technologies adapted to different ecological conditions, innovations that reflected the remarkable flexibility and creativity of human intelligence when confronted with novel challenges that had no precedent in previous experience. Arctic populations developed ingenious techniques for burning animal fat and bone marrow when wood was unavailable, learning to render oils from seal blubber and whale fat that could provide both light and heat during the endless polar nights. Desert peoples learned to conserve precious fuel and water while maintaining essential fires, discovering methods for creating long-burning fires from dried dung and sparse vegetation, developing portable fire-starting kits that could function reliably even in conditions of extreme heat and aridity. Coastal communities discovered innovative methods for drying and burning seaweed and driftwood, taking advantage of the ocean's bounty to fuel their fires even when traditional forest resources were scarce or unavailable. Mountain dwellers mastered the complex art of building fires at high altitudes, where thin air made combustion difficult and unpredictable, learning to adjust their techniques to compensate for reduced oxygen levels and to take advantage of the unique burning properties of alpine woods and shrubs. Each of these technological adaptations required not just practical innovation but also deep understanding of local environmental conditions, intimate knowledge of available materials and their properties, and the kind of patient experimentation that could only occur when human communities remained in specific environments long enough to develop specialized expertise. The global spread of humanity thus became also a global expansion of human knowledge, as different populations developed unique insights and techniques that reflected their particular environmental challenges and opportunities. The social implications of the Great Migrations were equally profound, as the expansion of human populations into new territories required the development of increasingly sophisticated forms of social organization and cooperation. The challenges of coordinating large-scale movements, maintaining group cohesion during difficult journeys, and establishing new communities in unfamiliar environments pushed human societies toward greater complexity and specialization, laying the groundwork for the elaborate social structures that would eventually characterize settled civilizations. The firekeepers and torchmakers who accompanied these migratory groups often held positions of special responsibility and authority, as their specialized knowledge could mean the difference between life and death in harsh new environments. These individuals became the protectors, not just of physical flames, but of the cultural knowledge and technological expertise that enabled human survival in diverse conditions, serving as living libraries of accumulated wisdom that could be consulted whenever new challenges arose. The Great Migrations also facilitated the exchange of knowledge and techniques between different human populations, as groups that had developed specialized expertise in particular environments shared their innovations with others who were facing similar challenges in distant locations, creating networks of information flow that spanned continents and connected diverse human communities in webs of mutual learning and support. This cross-pollination of ideas and technologies accelerated the pace of human cultural development and helped to establish the foundations for the global networks of trade and communication that would eventually connect all human societies in increasingly complex relationships of interdependence and cooperation. The paths followed by these ancient migrations can still be traced today through the distribution of archaeological sites, genetic markers, and linguistic patterns that reveal the routes taken by our torch-bearing ancestors as they spread across the continents. These migration corridors often followed rivers, coastlines, and mountain passes that provided natural highways for human movement, routes that were marked by the presence of suitable fire-making materials and the availability of resources necessary for human survival in unfamiliar environments. As our ancestors spread across the continents, carrying their torches into previously unexplored territories and establishing new communities in environments that had never before known human presence, they were not just expanding the geographical range of human habitation, but also expanding the realm of human consciousness itself. Each new landscape they encountered, each new challenge they overcame, each new solution they developed, contributed to the growing complexity and sophistication of human culture, adding new chapters to the story of what it means to be human in relationship with the natural world. The legacy of these great migrations continues to influence human society to this day, visible in the remarkable diversity of human cultures and the extraordinary adaptability that has allowed our species to thrive in virtually every environment on Earth. The torch-bearing ancestors who first ventured beyond the boundaries of their ancestral homelands were not just explorers seeking new territories. They were pioneers of human possibility, demonstrating that conscious beings armed with fire and determination could overcome virtually any obstacle that nature might place in their path. In the flickering light of those ancient torches, carried across vast distances by hands that never wavered in their determination to explore new frontiers, our ancestors were writing the first chapters of a story that continues to unfold today. As human consciousness continues to expand its reach and influence, pushing beyond the boundaries of Earth itself toward new frontiers among the stars. The Great Migration that began with fire-bearing humans walking out of Africa has never truly ended. It has simply expanded its scope to encompass new realms of possibility that our torch-carrying ancestors could never have imagined, but which somehow seem to have been implicit in their first brave steps into the unknown darkness, beyond the familiar glow of their ancestral fires. The day we lit the first torch, when darkness ceased to be absolute. Chapter 6. The Whispering Flames of Memory. As we settle deeper into our contemplative journey through the corridors of deep time, we find ourselves approaching one of the most mysterious and fascinating aspects of humanity's relationship with fire, the profound role that controlled combustion played in the development of human memory, storytelling, and the preservation of knowledge across generations. The flickering flames that danced before our ancestors' eyes were not just sources of light and heat. They were the world's first libraries, the original repositories of human wisdom, the sacred keepers of stories and songs and cultural knowledge that would otherwise have been lost forever to the relentless passage of time. Picture, if you will, the scene that unfolded countless times around prehistoric fires, as the day's activities came to an end and communities gathered in the warm glow of their carefully tended flames, settling into circles that represented far more than mere convenience or comfort, arrangements that seemed to emerge from some deep understanding of how human consciousness responds to the interplay of light and darkness, intimacy and vastness, the known circle of illumination and the mysterious realm beyond its boundaries. These evening gatherings became humanity's first universities, informal but profound educational institutions where the accumulated wisdom of countless generations was shared, preserved, and passed down through the ancient art of oral tradition, where the flickering light of the fire seemed to awaken something deep within human consciousness, something that transformed ordinary conversation into the sacred act of cultural transmission. The transition from day to night, from active work to contemplative rest, from individual concerns to communal sharing, created natural rhythms that our ancestors learned to harmonize with their knowledge-sharing activities, understanding intuitively that certain times and conditions were more conducive to deep learning and meaningful communication than others. The fire circle represented a threshold space, a boundary between worlds where ordinary consciousness could give way to heightened awareness and enhanced receptivity to wisdom and insight. The hypnotic quality of firelight played a crucial role in these knowledge-sharing sessions, creating altered states of consciousness that enhanced memory formation and made stories more vivid, more emotionally engaging, more likely to be remembered and retold accurately by subsequent generations. The rhythmic crackling of burning wood, the ever-changing patterns of light and shadow, the warm drowsiness that came from sitting close to a fire after a long day of activity, all of these factors combine to create ideal conditions for the kind of deep learning that embeds knowledge not just in conscious memory, but in the very structure of the brain itself. Modern neuroscience has revealed that the brain states induced by firelight and the social dynamics of group storytelling are remarkably similar to those that occur during the most effective forms of learning and memory consolidation, suggesting that our ancestors may have stumbled upon optimal conditions for knowledge transmission and preservation without any conscious understanding of the neurological mechanisms involved. The firelight gatherings that seemed so natural and inevitable to our prehistoric ancestors were actually sophisticated educational technologies that maximized the human capacity for learning, remembering, and cultural transmission. The stories that emerged from these fireside gatherings were far more than simple entertainment. They were complex mnemonic devices that encoded practical knowledge about everything from the behavior of animals to the properties of plants, from the patterns of weather to the locations of water sources, all embedded within narratives that were designed to be memorable, emotionally engaging, and easily transmitted from one generation to the next through the sophisticated techniques of oral performance. The mythological traditions that we often dismiss today as primitive superstition were actually sophisticated information, storage, and retrieval systems that allowed pre-literate societies to maintain vast libraries of practical knowledge without any form of written record, systems that were in many ways more robust and resilient than the fragile written documents that would eventually replace them. Each story served multiple functions simultaneously, entertaining listeners while educating them, preserving historical information while teaching moral lessons, encoding technical knowledge while inspiring spiritual insight. The master storytellers who developed and maintained these traditions were cognitive athletes, whose mental capabilities rivaled those of the most accomplished scholars in literate societies, individuals who had trained their memories to hold thousands of stories, songs, genealogies, and technical procedures with perfect accuracy across decades of performance. These oral traditions were not static collections of fixed stories but dynamic, evolving systems of knowledge that could adapt and grow over time, incorporating new discoveries and insights while maintaining the essential core of wisdom that had been tested and refined by countless generations of human experience. The storytellers who served as the keepers of these traditions were not mere entertainers but highly trained specialists, who had devoted years to mastering the complex techniques required to memorize, organize, and transmit vast amounts of cultural knowledge. The development of these oral tradition systems may have played a crucial role in the evolution of human language itself, creating selective pressures that favored individuals with enhanced verbal skills, better memory capabilities, and more sophisticated abilities to organize and structure complex information. The storytelling sessions that unfolded around prehistoric fires may have been among the most important classrooms in human history, the places where our species first learned to use language not just for immediate communication, but for the preservation and transmission of abstract knowledge across time. Some researchers have proposed that the specific acoustic properties of fire may have influenced the development of human speech patterns and vocal techniques, as the background sound of crackling flames created a natural acoustic environment that favored certain types of vocal production and made some frequencies more audible than others. The storytellers who performed around fires would have naturally adapted their vocal techniques to overcome the masking effects of fire noise, potentially leading to the development of the rhythmic, melodic speech patterns that characterize effective oral performance in cultures around the world. The role of fire in human memory formation extended beyond the immediate effects of firelight on brain chemistry to encompass the broader social and psychological dynamics that emerged around communal fires. The intimate setting of the fire circle, the shared experience of warmth and light in the midst of darkness, the sense of safety and community that developed around these gatherings, all of these factors created emotional contexts that enhanced the formation of long-term memories and strengthened the social bonds that made cultural transmission possible. The fire circle also served as a natural theatre where knowledge could be transmitted not just through spoken words but through gesture, dance, music, and dramatic performance, creating multi-sensory learning experiences that engaged multiple areas of the brain simultaneously and created rich, complex memory traces that were far more durable than those formed through purely verbal instruction. The shadows cast by firelight could be manipulated to illustrate stories, becoming living illustrations that moved and changed with the narrative, while the rhythm of the flames could provide musical accompaniment for songs and chants, and the warm glow of the fire could create emotional atmospheres that enhanced the impact of important teachings. These performances were not merely educational but deeply spiritual experiences that connected participants to their ancestors, their community, and the larger mysteries of existence. The act of sharing stories around a fire created bonds that transcended individual identity, weaving listeners into the ongoing narrative of human experience and giving them a sense of their place in the great chain of being that stretched from the first stirrings of consciousness to the unknown possibilities of the future. There are also intriguing theories about the role that naturally occurring psychoactive substances may have played in these fireside learning sessions, as many of the plants that our ancestors would have encountered in their daily activities contained compounds that could alter consciousness in ways that enhanced creativity, memory formation, and spiritual insight. The smoke from certain burning plants, the consumption of fermented fruits and honey, the inhalation of aromatic herbs and resins, all of these could have contributed to altered states of consciousness that made the fireside gatherings even more conducive to profound learning and spiritual experience. The knowledge preservation systems that developed around fires were not limited to practical information about survival and technology, but also encompassed the full range of human experience, including artistic traditions, spiritual beliefs, philosophical insights, and emotional wisdom that helped our ancestors navigate the complex challenges of social life and personal development. The fire circle became a repository for everything that made human life meaningful and purposeful, a sacred space where the deepest questions about existence could be explored and the most profound insights could be shared. These oral tradition systems were remarkably sophisticated in their ability to preserve accurate information across vast periods of time, with some traditions maintaining detailed knowledge about astronomical phenomena, geographical features, and historical events for thousands of years without any written records. The techniques developed by our ancestors for organizing and memorizing complex information were so effective that they continued to be used by many cultures long after writing systems became available, suggesting that oral tradition may actually be superior to written records for certain types of knowledge preservation. The decline of oral tradition systems in favor of written records may have represented not just a technological advancement, but also a significant loss in human cognitive capability, as the mental skills required for effective memorization and oral performance gradually atrophied in societies that came to depend primarily on external storage systems for knowledge preservation. The storytellers and memory specialists of pre-literate societies possessed cognitive abilities that may have far exceeded those of most modern humans, who have grown dependent on written and electronic memory aids. The fire circles of our ancestors were also the birthplace of human artistic traditions, as the unique atmosphere created by firelight inspired new forms of creative expression that would eventually evolve into music, poetry, theatre, and visual arts. The earliest human artworks were probably not the cave paintings that archaeologists have discovered, but the ephemeral performances that took place around fires, songs and dances and stories that existed only in the moment of their creation, but that laid the foundation for all subsequent human artistic achievement. The spiritual dimensions of fire circle gatherings were equally profound, as the experience of sitting together in the warm glow of flames, while surrounded by the vast darkness of night, naturally led our ancestors to contemplate the deepest questions about existence, consciousness, and humanity's place in the cosmic order. The fire became a focal point for meditation and spiritual practice, a symbol of the divine spark that animated all living things, a bridge between the material and spiritual worlds that allowed human consciousness to explore realms of experience beyond the immediate demands of physical survival. Many of the world's oldest religious and philosophical traditions preserve memories of these ancient fire ceremonies, with fire continuing to play central roles in spiritual practices across cultures and throughout history. The sacred fires of Hindu temples, the eternal flames of Zoroastrian ceremonies, the candles of Christian worship, the campfires of Native American vision quests, all of these represent continuations of traditions that began when our ancestors first gathered around fires to share stories and seek wisdom in the dancing flames. As our journey through deep time continues, we begin to see how the simple act of gathering around fires to share stories and preserve knowledge laid the foundation for all subsequent human achievements in education, literature, philosophy, and spiritual understanding. The flickering flames that illuminated those ancient gatherings were not just sources of physical light but beacons of consciousness itself, calling human awareness toward higher possibilities and deeper understanding of the mysteries that surround us. In the warm glow of those prehistoric fires, surrounded by the voices of our ancestors, sharing the wisdom of countless generations, we can still hear the echoes of humanity's first attempts to make sense of existence, to preserve knowledge for future generations, and to create meaning and purpose through the power of shared story and collective memory. The fire circles of our ancestors were the original schools of human consciousness, the first laboratories for exploring the infinite possibilities of awareness and understanding that continue to define our species' ongoing journey toward greater knowledge and wisdom. The techniques and traditions that emerged from these ancient gatherings continue to influence human culture today, visible in our persistent fascination with storytelling, our instinctive gathering around fires and candles during important ceremonies, our recognition that some forms of knowledge can only be transmitted through direct experience and personal relationship, rather than through written texts or digital media. The fire circle represents an enduring model for human learning and community that transcends technological change, reminding us that the deepest forms of wisdom arise not from solitary study, but from the shared exploration of meaning that occurs when conscious beings come together in sacred space to contemplate the mysteries of existence and pass the treasures of understanding from one generation to the next. As our gentle exploration of deep time carries us further into the mysteries of human development, we find ourselves drawn toward one of the most extraordinary and least understood chapters in the story of our species. The period when fire-wielding humans first ventured into the deepest recesses of the earth, carrying their precious torches into caves and underground chambers that had remained in absolute darkness since the beginning of geological time. These subterranean expeditions represent far more than simple explorations of new territories. They mark humanity's first conscious descent into the symbolic underworld of the unconscious mind, the first deliberate journey into realms that would forever change our species' understanding of reality, consciousness, and the hidden dimensions of existence that lie beneath the surface of ordinary experience. Picture, if you will, the profound courage required for those first descents into the bowels of the earth, as our ancestors gathered their most reliable torches and fire-making equipment, said farewell to the familiar world of sunlight and open sky, and began their careful descent into passages that twisted and narrowed into the heart of living rock, following routes that led deeper and deeper into realms where the very concept of direction began to lose meaning. The psychological impact of these journeys into absolute darkness cannot be overstated, for they represented humanity's first conscious confrontation with the ultimate unknown, the first deliberate exploration of spaces where no human eye had ever seen, where no human foot had ever stepped, where consciousness itself was the only light that had ever existed since the formation of the earth itself. The descent into caves required not just physical courage but a profound psychological transformation, as the familiar landmarks and reference points of surface existence gradually disappeared, replaced by an alien landscape of stone passages, underground chambers, and geological formations that seemed to exist according to entirely different principles than the world above. The experience of moving through these underground mazes would have challenged every assumption about space, time, and reality that our ancestors had developed during their surface-dwelling existence, forcing them to develop new forms of perception and understanding that could navigate the mysterious realm beneath the earth. The caves that our ancestors explored were not merely geological formations, but sacred spaces that seemed to exist outside the normal boundaries of time and space. Chambers where the ordinary rules of surface existence no longer applied, and where human consciousness could encounter forms of experience that were impossible in the world above. The walls of these underground chambers became humanity's first art galleries, covered with paintings and engravings that reveal levels of artistic sophistication and symbolic thinking that continue to amaze researchers today. The works of art that were created in conditions of unimaginable difficulty, and yet display a mastery of technique and depth of vision that rival the greatest achievements of later civilizations. The act of creating art in these deep caves required not just artistic skill, but also remarkable planning, preparation, and logistical coordination, as the materials needed for painting had to be gathered, prepared, and transported through narrow passages and treacherous terrain, while the artists themselves had to work by the flickering light of torches in conditions of extreme cold, humidity, and isolation that would have tested the limits of human endurance and determination. The fact that our ancestors were willing to undertake such enormous efforts to create art in these remote and inaccessible locations suggests that the caves held profound spiritual and psychological significance that went far beyond mere decoration or entertainment, representing perhaps humanity's first attempts to create sacred spaces dedicated specifically to the exploration of consciousness and the expression of visionary experience. The logistics alone of these underground art projects would have required unprecedented levels of cooperation and organization, as teams of individuals would have needed to coordinate the gathering of pigments, the preparation of painting tools, the transportation of materials through difficult cave passages, and the maintenance of adequate lighting throughout the extended periods required to complete complex artworks. The sophisticated scaffolding and support systems that would have been necessary to reach high cave walls and ceilings demonstrate engineering capabilities that challenge our assumptions about the technological sophistication of prehistoric societies. Some researchers have proposed that these cave expeditions may have been among humanity's first experiments with what we would later recognize as shamanic practice, deliberately induced altered states of consciousness that allowed individuals to access forms of knowledge and insight that were unavailable through ordinary awareness. The combination of sensory deprivation, physical challenge, and the mysterious atmosphere of the underground environment would have created ideal conditions for the kind of consciousness alteration that shamans and mystics have used throughout history to explore non-ordinary realities and gain access to hidden dimensions of knowledge and understanding. The paintings themselves often display characteristics that suggest their creators were working in altered states of consciousness, with flowing, dreamlike imagery that seems to emerge from the rock itself, animals that appear to move and dance in the flickering torchlight, and abstract symbols that may represent visions or insights that emerge during deep meditative or trance states. The use of natural rock formations to enhance the three-dimensional quality of the paintings suggests a sophisticated understanding of how consciousness interacts with environment to create meaning and significance. The choice of animals depicted in these caves is also intriguing, as the artists often focused on creatures that held special significance in the spiritual and psychological life of their communities, animals that served as totems, guides, or symbols of power and transformation. The great herds of bison, the majestic horses, the dangerous predators that appear on cave walls were not merely representations of the animals themselves, but symbols of the forces and energies that our ancestors sought to understand and harmonize with through their artistic and spiritual practices. The geometric patterns and abstract symbols that appear alongside the animal paintings may represent some of humanity's first attempts to create visual languages for describing experiences and insights that could not be communicated through ordinary speech or gesture. Sophisticated symbolic systems that encoded information about altered states of consciousness, spiritual visions, and the hidden structures of reality that became visible during deep meditative or trance experiences. These symbols may have served as maps of consciousness, guides for navigating altered states of awareness, or records of visionary experiences that occurred during the cave ceremonies and retreats that seem to have been central to the spiritual life of many prehistoric communities. The recurring motifs and symbolic patterns that appear in caves across different continents and time periods suggest the existence of shared understanding about the nature of consciousness and reality that transcended individual cultures and geographic boundaries, pointing toward the possibility that our ancestors had discovered universal principles about the workings of the mind and the structure of existence that modern science is only beginning to rediscover through neuroscience, quantum physics, and consciousness research. The acoustic properties of caves may have also played important roles in the spiritual and ceremonial activities that took place in these underground chambers, as the natural echo and resonance effects created by cave formations could transform ordinary sounds into otherworldly experiences. The chanting, singing, and drumming that likely accompanied the creation of cave art would have been amplified and transformed by the cave acoustics, creating immersive sound environments that enhanced the consciousness-altering effects of the underground experience. Recent research in archaeoacoustics has revealed that many of the caves containing the most elaborate prehistoric art also possess remarkable acoustic properties, with specific locations within the caves that produce unusual echoes, harmonic resonances, or other sound phenomena that could have been interpreted as supernatural or spiritual manifestations. These acoustic anomalies may have been among the factors that led our ancestors to regard certain caves as sacred spaces, worthy of the enormous effort required to create and maintain underground art galleries. The preservation of cave art across tens of thousands of years has provided us with an unprecedented window into the consciousness and capabilities of our prehistoric ancestors, revealing levels of artistic achievement and symbolic sophistication that challenge many assumptions about the linear progression of human cultural development. The fact that some of the earliest known human art displays such remarkable technical and aesthetic accomplishment suggests that the cognitive revolution triggered by fire mastery may have produced far more advanced forms of consciousness and creative expression than conventional archaeology has been willing to acknowledge. There are also intriguing theories about the possibility that caves served as humanity's first schools for developing and transmitting specialized knowledge about consciousness, spirituality, and the hidden dimensions of reality. The isolation and sensory deprivation provided by deep caves would have created ideal conditions for intensive training in meditation, visualization, and other consciousness techniques, while the dramatic and mysterious environment would have enhanced the impact of teachings about the nature of reality and the possibilities of human awareness. The cave ceremonies may have also served important social and psychological functions, providing rites of passage for young people entering adulthood, initiation experiences for individuals joining specialized roles within their communities, or healing rituals for those suffering from physical or psychological ailments. The profound altered states of consciousness that could be induced through cave experiences may have had therapeutic effects that went far beyond anything available through ordinary healing practices. The underground journeys of our ancestors may have also contributed to the development of humanity's understanding of time, space, and the structure of reality itself, as the experience of moving through the three-dimensional maze of cave passages required new forms of spatial reasoning and navigation that challenged the cognitive capabilities that had evolved for surface living, forcing the development of enhanced memory systems, improved visualization abilities, and more sophisticated understanding of complex three-dimensional relationships. The timeless quality of cave environments, where day and night ceased to have meaning and where the normal rhythms of surface life were suspended, may have provided our ancestors with their first experiences of transcendent consciousness that existed outside the ordinary flow of temporal awareness, opening doorways to understanding about the nature of time, eternity, and the relationship between finite existence and infinite possibility. These underground experiences may have been among the first contexts in which human beings encountered what we might now recognize as non-ordinary states of consciousness. Altered awareness characterized by expanded perception, enhanced creativity, profound insights into the nature of reality, and direct experience of the interconnectedness that underlies the apparent separation of individual existence. The caves became laboratories for consciousness exploration, sacred spaces where the normal boundaries of selfhood could dissolve, and individual awareness could merge with larger patterns of meaning and understanding. The symbolic significance of caves as representations of the womb, the underworld, or the depths of the unconscious mind has persisted throughout human culture, appearing in mythologies, religious traditions, and psychological theories that recognize the cave as a universal symbol of death and rebirth, of descent into darkness, followed by emergence into light, of the journey into the depths of the self that is necessary for spiritual growth and transformation. The legacy of these ancient cave expeditions continues to influence human culture and consciousness today, visible in our persistent fascination with underground spaces, our recognition of caves as sites of mystery and spiritual significance, and our understanding that some forms of knowledge and insight can only be gained through willingness to descend into darkness and confront the unknown depths of existence. The torch-bearing explorers who first carried light into the deepest chambers of the earth were not just creating art or exploring new territories, they were pioneering forms of consciousness exploration that would become central to human spiritual and psychological development. As we contemplate the extraordinary courage and vision of these prehistoric cave artists and explorers, we begin to see how their willingness to venture into the unknown depths of the earth parallels humanity's ongoing journey into the unknown depths of consciousness itself, a journey that continues today as we use new technologies and techniques to explore the mysteries of the mind and push the boundaries of human awareness ever further into realms that our cave-painting ancestors could never have imagined, but which somehow seem to have been implicit in their first brave steps into the sacred darkness of the underground world. As we drift deeper into our contemplative exploration of humanity's relationship with fire, we find ourselves witnessing one of the most subtle yet profound transformations in human consciousness, the gradual awakening to the extraordinary power of shadows and the interplay between light and darkness that would eventually give birth to humanity's understanding of symbolism, metaphor, and the deep structures of meaning that underlie all human thought and expression. The dancing shadows cast by flickering flames were not merely byproducts of combustion but became active participants in the expansion of human awareness, teachers that showed our ancestors how reality could be represented, manipulated, and understood through the careful orchestration of light and darkness. Picture, if you will, the moment when our ancestors first noticed that the shadows cast by their bodies and tools could be made to move and change by altering the position of their fires, when they first realized that these ephemeral shapes dancing on cave walls and rocky surfaces could be controlled, directed, and used to tell stories, convey information, and explore ideas that existed primarily in the realm of imagination rather than concrete physical reality. This discovery marked the birth of what we might call humanity's first experiments with virtual reality, the creation of artificial worlds of meaning and significance that existed only in the interplay between consciousness, light, and shadow, worlds that could be summoned into existence with nothing more than a flickering flame and the creative positioning of hands, tools, or bodies between the fire and a suitable surface. The wonder and excitement that must have accompanied these first discoveries of shadow manipulation can barely be imagined today, when we take for granted the ability to create and consume artificial realities through sophisticated electronic media. For our ancestors, the realization that consciousness could extend itself beyond the boundaries of the physical body, could create visible representations of invisible thoughts and feelings, could share the contents of imagination with others through the simple manipulation of light and darkness, must have seemed like nothing short of magic, a glimpse into powers and possibilities that transcended the ordinary limitations of material existence. The development of shadow play as both entertainment and educational tool required sophisticated understanding of the relationships between light sources, objects, and surfaces, demanding new forms of spatial reasoning and geometric intuition that pushed the boundaries of prehistoric cognitive capabilities. Our ancestors had to learn to think in terms of projections, transformations, and the mathematical relationships that govern how three-dimensional objects create two-dimensional shadows, concepts that would not be formally understood until the development of geometry thousands of years later. yet which our fire-using ancestors mastered through practical experimentation and intuitive exploration. But shadow play was more than just a clever manipulation of physics. It represented a fundamental breakthrough in human symbolic thinking. The recognition that one thing could represent another, that abstract ideas could be given visual form, that the invisible contents of consciousness could be made manifest through the careful arrangement of light and darkness. The shadows that danced on prehistoric cave walls were humanity's first movies, the earliest forms of cinematic expression that would eventually evolve into the sophisticated visual media that dominate modern culture. The psychological impact of discovering that consciousness could create and control alternate realities through the manipulation of light was profound, fundamentally altering our ancestors' understanding of the relationship between mind and world, between internal experience and external reality, between the realm of the possible and the constraints of the immediately present. For the first time in the history of consciousness, our ancestors realized that the contents of imagination could be shared directly with others, that the private world of thought and dream could be made public and collective through the medium of projected shadows, that individual creativity could become communal experience through the simple act of positioning oneself between fire and wall. This breakthrough represented a quantum leap in human social development, as it opened new possibilities for shared experience that went beyond the immediate sharing of physical resources or practical activities. The shadow play became a meeting ground for minds, a space where individual consciousness could merge with collective awareness through the shared contemplation of images that existed neither fully in the mind nor completely in the external world, but somewhere in the liminal space between 15-9, inner and outer reality. This breakthrough in representational thinking had implications that extended far beyond entertainment and storytelling, touching every aspect of human cognitive development and laying the foundation for all subsequent advances in art, science, philosophy, and technology. The ability to create visual representations of abstract ideas made possible new forms of teaching and learning, new methods for preserving and transmitting knowledge, new ways of exploring hypothetical scenarios and imagining alternative possibilities. The shadows cast by firelight also became humanity's first laboratory for exploring the nature of perception itself, as our ancestors discovered that the same object could create dramatically different shadows depending on the angle of the light, the distance from the fire, and the surface on which the shadow fell. This variability in shadow formation led to profound insights about the subjective nature of perception and the role that perspective plays in determining how reality appears to consciousness, insights that would eventually contribute to the development of philosophy, psychology, and the scientific understanding of how minds construct their experience of the world. The manipulation of shadows for storytelling purposes required the development of increasingly sophisticated narrative techniques, as shadow puppeteers learned to create complex characters, dramatic scenes, and elaborate plots that could hold audiences spellbound for hours at a time. These shadow stories became vehicles for transmitting cultural values, moral teachings, historical information, and spiritual wisdom, serving functions that were simultaneously educational, entertaining, and transformative. The creation of shadow narratives also demanded new forms of coordination and collaboration, as effective shadow plays often required multiple performers working together to manipulate different elements of the story, to provide voices for characters, to create sound effects and musical accompaniment, and to coordinate the timing and pacing of dramatic events. These collaborative shadow performances became humanity's first theatre companies, the original dramatic ensembles that would eventually evolve into the sophisticated performance traditions that characterize human artistic expression. The technical innovations required for advanced shadow play pushed the development of fire technology in new directions. As shadow artists discovered that different types of flames produced different qualities of light, that the use of reflective surfaces could enhance and focus illumination, that the careful positioning of multiple fires could create complex lighting effects that added depth and dimension to shadow performances. These technical developments laid the groundwork for the more sophisticated lighting technologies that would eventually emerge in later civilizations. The spiritual and psychological dimensions of shadow work were equally profound, as the experience of watching shadows dance and transform in the firelight naturally led our ancestors to contemplate the relationship between substance and appearance, between the permanent and the ephemeral, between the real and the illusory. The shadows became metaphors for the transient nature of all phenomena, symbols of the way consciousness creates reality through the interplay of awareness and the objects of awareness. Many ancient wisdom traditions preserve teachings about the symbolic significance of shadows, recognizing them as representations of the unconscious mind, the hidden aspects of personality, the parts of the self that remain in darkness until brought into the light of conscious awareness. The shadow work that began around prehistoric fires may have been among humanity's first experiments with what we would now recognize as psychology, the systematic exploration of the hidden dimensions of consciousness, and the integration of light and dark aspects of human experience. The mathematical insights that emerged from shadow manipulation contributed to the development of humanity's understanding of proportion, perspective, and the geometric relationships that govern visual perception. The discovery that objects of different sizes could create shadows of the same size, depending on their distance from the light source, led to profound insights about the nature of space, distance, and the way consciousness constructs its sense of three-dimensional reality from two-dimensional sensory input. The use of shadows for communication purposes may have contributed to the development of the first writing systems, as our ancestors learned to create standardized shadow shapes that could represent specific ideas, objects, or concepts. These shadow symbols may have been among the earliest forms of written language, pictographic systems that encoded information in visual form and allowed for the transmission of complex ideas across time and distance. The aesthetic appreciation that developed around shadow art laid the foundation for humanity's understanding of beauty, composition, and the principles of visual design that would eventually characterize all forms of artistic expression. The interplay of light and shadow taught our ancestors about contrast, balance, rhythm, and the subtle relationships between different visual elements that create pleasing and meaningful compositions. As shadow work became more sophisticated, it began to influence other forms of artistic expression, inspiring innovations in sculpture, painting, and decorative arts that explored the creative possibilities inherent in the manipulation of light and darkness. The cave painters who created the earliest known human artworks often took advantage of natural shadow effects created by the irregular surfaces of cave walls, using shadows to enhance the three-dimensional quality of their paintings and create images that seem to move and breathe in the flickering firelight. The legacy of these ancient shadow traditions continues to influence human culture today, visible in our ongoing fascination with cinema, theatre, and visual media that depend on the creative manipulation of light and darkness to create meaning and emotional impact. The shadow puppeteers who performed around prehistoric fires were the ancestors of all subsequent filmmakers, animators, and visual artists who use light and shadow to tell stories, convey ideas, and explore the infinite possibilities of human imagination. The profound insights about the nature of reality that emerged from shadow work continue to resonate through philosophy, science, and spiritual traditions that recognize the fundamental importance of the interplay between light and darkness in shaping human consciousness and understanding. The dancing shadows that first captivated our fire-using ancestors were not just entertaining distractions but teachers that revealed deep truths about the nature of perception, reality, and the creative power of consciousness to transform mere light and darkness into worlds of infinite meaning and possibility. In the flickering shadows cast by those ancient fires, our ancestors discovered not just new forms of entertainment and education but new dimensions of human potential, new ways of understanding the relationship between mind and world that would eventually lead to all the sophisticated technologies and artistic achievements that define modern civilization. The shadow dancers who performed around prehistoric fires were the first explorers of virtual reality, the original masters of an art form that continues to evolve and expand the boundaries of human experience and understanding. As our contemplative journey through deep time brings us closer to the threshold between prehistory and the dawn of recorded civilization, we find ourselves confronting one of the most mysterious and sobering chapters in the human story. The period when our fire-wielding ancestors faced catastrophic events of such magnitude that they threatened to extinguish not just individual lives or communities, but the entire accumulated wisdom and technological achievement of countless generations. These great catastrophes, whether triggered by volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, climate changes, or other natural disasters, represent crucial testing points in human development, moments when the survival of our species and the preservation of our cultural achievements depended entirely upon the resilience, adaptability, and profound wisdom that our ancestors had developed through their long relationship with fire. Picture, if you will, the unimaginable terror and confusion that must have gripped human communities when the familiar patterns of existence were suddenly shattered by forces beyond comprehension or control, when the sky turned dark for months or years at a time, blocking out the sun's life-giving rays and plunging the world into an unnatural winter that seemed to have no end. When temperatures plummeted far below anything in living memory, creating conditions so harsh that even the hardiest plants and animals began to perish en masse. In these moments of ultimate crisis, when vast regions became uninhabitable overnight and entire ecosystems collapsed, forcing populations to abandon ancestral homes that had sheltered their families for countless generations and seek refuge in distant lands where they had no established relationships or resources, fire became more than just a tool or companion. It became the thread that connected human communities to their past and future, the sacred flame that carried the essential knowledge and wisdom needed to rebuild civilization from the scattered fragments of a shattered world. The scale of these catastrophic events defies modern imagination, representing disruptions so profound that they rewrote the basic conditions of existence across entire continents, creating challenges that tested every aspect of human adaptability and forced communities to innovate at a pace and intensity that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The sudden onset of these disasters left no time for gradual adaptation or careful planning, demanding immediate responses that drew upon the deepest reserves of human intelligence, creativity, and cooperation. The role that fire mastery played in enabling human survival during these catastrophic periods cannot be overstated, for without the ability to create artificial warmth in a world suddenly plunged into unnatural cold, to cook food when familiar plant and animal resources became scarce or unavailable, to provide light during extended periods of darkness, to maintain social cohesion when all other sources of stability had disappeared, human populations would almost certainly have joined the countless species that perished during these great extinction events. Fire became humanity's ark, the technological and cultural life raft that carried our species through the storms of cosmic catastrophe and natural disaster. But perhaps even more remarkably, these periods of extreme crisis seem to have accelerated certain aspects of human development, forcing innovations and adaptations that might never have emerged under ordinary circumstances, pushing the boundaries of human capability and understanding in ways that ultimately strengthened and enriched our species' relationship with the natural world. The necessity of conserving fuel during extended periods of scarcity led to improvements in fire efficiency and burning techniques, while the challenge of maintaining fires in harsh new environments spurred innovations in shelter, construction, and fire protection that would have lasting benefits for human technology. The social implications of surviving catastrophic events were equally profound, as communities that successfully weathered these crises often emerged with stronger bonds, more sophisticated organizational structures, and deeper appreciation for the knowledge and skills that had enabled their survival. The firekeepers and technical specialists who proved their worth during times of crisis often found themselves elevated to positions of greater respect and authority, becoming the guardians not just of practical knowledge but of the cultural memory that connected survivors to their pre-catastrophe heritage. Some researchers have proposed that certain catastrophic events may have occurred much more recently in human history than conventional chronologies suggest, and that some of the mythological traditions preserved by ancient cultures may actually represent accurate memories of real geological and astronomical events that profoundly disrupted human civilization. The flood myths that appear in cultures around the world, the stories of great fires that swept across the earth, the legends of times when the sun disappeared from the sky for extended periods, all of these may be cultural memories of actual catastrophic events that forced human populations to rebuild their societies from the ground up. There are also intriguing theories about the possibility that some prehistoric human societies may have achieved levels of technological and cultural sophistication that were largely lost during major catastrophic events, leaving only fragmentary traces in archaeological remains and mythological traditions that hint at achievements far beyond what conventional timelines would suggest possible. The remarkable sophistication displayed in some of the earliest known human artworks and monuments, the precision of ancient astronomical observations, the complexity of certain prehistoric engineering projects, all of these suggest that the development of human civilization may not have followed the simple linear progression typically portrayed in history textbooks, but may instead have involved cycles of achievement and loss, advancement and catastrophe that have obscured the true complexity of our species' cultural development. Some researchers have proposed that these lost civilizations may have possessed advanced understanding of natural phenomena, sophisticated technologies for predicting and preparing for catastrophic events, and even methods for preserving essential knowledge through periods of civilizational collapse that we are only beginning to rediscover through modern archaeological and anthropological research. The possibility that our ancestors may have faced and survived multiple cycles of catastrophic destruction and rebuilding adds profound depth to our understanding of human resilience and adaptability. The preservation of fire-making knowledge during catastrophic periods required the development of increasingly sophisticated methods for storing and protecting the tools, materials, and techniques needed to maintain human technological capability under extreme conditions that could persist for years or even decades. The creation of hidden caches of fire-making supplies, carefully concealed in locations that could survive geological upheavals and climate changes, the development of redundant preservation systems that ensured essential knowledge would not be lost even if primary repositories were destroyed, the training of multiple specialists in essential techniques so that critical knowledge would not disappear with the death of individual experts. All of these innovations emerged from the harsh lessons learned during previous catastrophic events and helped to ensure that future disasters would not completely erase human technological achievement. These preservation strategies required remarkable foresight and planning, as communities had to anticipate challenges they had never directly experienced and prepare for contingencies that might not arise for many generations. The development of these long-term preservation systems represents some of humanity's earliest experiments with what we might now recognize as strategic planning and risk management, demonstrating levels of abstract thinking and temporal reasoning that challenge assumptions about the cognitive capabilities of prehistoric societies. The psychological and spiritual resources that enabled human communities to survive catastrophic events were as important as the technical knowledge and material resources, requiring forms of mental resilience, emotional stability, and spiritual understanding that could provide meaning and hope during the darkest periods of human experience. The fire circles that had served as centers of education and entertainment during peaceful times became sources of psychological support and spiritual sustenance during crisis periods. Sacred spaces where communities could gather to share resources, maintain morale, and preserve the cultural traditions that gave meaning to survival efforts. The mythological and religious traditions that emerged from catastrophic experiences often placed fire at the center of creation and destruction narratives, recognizing the dual nature of combustion as both a creative force that enables life and civilization and a destructive power that can consume everything humans have built. These traditions preserved important knowledge about the cyclical nature of existence, the inevitability of change and challenge, and the importance of maintaining balance between human ambition and respect for the larger forces that govern natural processes. The development of early warning systems and disaster preparedness strategies may have been among the first applications of human astronomical knowledge, as communities that had survived previous catastrophic events learned to watch for signs of impending danger in the movements of celestial bodies, the behavior of animals, and the patterns of weather and geological activity. The preservation of this predictive knowledge required sophisticated oral tradition systems that could maintain accurate information across multiple generations, ensuring that communities would not be caught completely unprepared by future disasters. The trading networks and communication systems that connected distant human populations became crucial lifelines during catastrophic events, allowing communities to share resources, exchange information about survival strategies, and coordinate mutual aid efforts across vast geographical distances. The fire-based signaling systems that had developed for local communication were expanded into long-distance networks that could relay urgent messages about changing conditions, resource availability, and safe passage routes for refugee populations. The innovations in food preservation and storage that emerged during catastrophic periods led to significant advances in human nutritional science and agricultural techniques, as communities learned to maintain adequate nutrition during extended periods when normal food sources were unavailable. The development of smoking, drying, and other fire-based preservation methods allowed human populations to maintain larger food reserves and survive longer periods of scarcity than would otherwise have been possible. The artistic and cultural responses to catastrophic events often produced some of the most profound and enduring expressions of human creativity, as communities sought to process and understand their experiences through symbolic representation, ritual performance, and mythological narrative. The cave paintings and other artworks created during or shortly after catastrophic periods often display an intensity and depth of feeling that reflects the profound impact these events had on human consciousness and understanding. The recovery periods that followed major catastrophic events were often times of remarkable innovation and cultural fluorescence, as communities rebuilt their societies with the benefit of hard-won experience and the integration of survival knowledge that had been tested under the most extreme conditions. The fire technologies that had proven their worth during crisis periods were refined and improved, while new innovations emerged from the creative synthesis of traditional knowledge and the novel challenges posed by changed environmental conditions. As we contemplate the extraordinary resilience and adaptability that enabled our ancestors to survive and rebuild after catastrophic events that would have destroyed less prepared societies, we begin to understand how these experiences of loss and recovery contributed to the development of the sophisticated technological and cultural traditions that would eventually give birth to settled civilization. The communities that emerged from catastrophic periods were not just survivors but graduates of the most demanding school of practical education that nature could provide, possessing knowledge and capabilities that had been forged in the crucible of ultimate challenge and tested against the highest possible stakes. The lessons learned from these ancient catastrophes continue to resonate today, as modern human civilization faces its own set of potentially catastrophic challenges that threaten to disrupt the technological and social systems upon which our current way of life depends. The fire-tending ancestors who preserved the light of human knowledge and culture through the darkest periods of prehistory offer us models of resilience, adaptability, and wisdom that may prove essential as we navigate the uncertain future that lies ahead, reminding us that the survival of consciousness and culture depends not just on technological capability, but on the deeper qualities of character and understanding that enable human communities to work together, preserve what is most valuable, and rebuild what has been lost with patience, determination, and hope. As our gentle journey through the vast corridors of deep time draws toward its close, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of a profound recognition, the understanding that the story we have been following together is not merely a tale of the distant past, but a living narrative that continues to unfold within us and around us with every breath we take, every choice we make, every moment of awareness that illuminates the darkness of ignorance and expands the boundaries of human possibility. The torch that our ancestors first lifted against the prehistoric night was not simply a tool for producing light. It was the beginning of an unbroken chain of illumination that continues to burn within the depths of human consciousness, connecting us across the millennia to those first brave souls who dared to challenge the absolute sovereignty of darkness and claim for consciousness its rightful place as a creative force in the universe. In the warm glow of this understanding, we begin to see how every aspect of our modern existence carries within it the echoes of those ancient discoveries, how every electric light that banishes darkness with the flip of a switch participates in the same fundamental act of rebellion against natural limitations that occurred when our ancestors first learned to carry fire in their hands. the smartphones that connect us instantly to information and each other, the computers that extend our cognitive capabilities far beyond what any individual mind could achieve alone, the rockets that carry human consciousness toward distant stars. All of these marvels of modern technology are direct descendants of that first moment, when a prehistoric human being realized that the forces of nature could be understood, harnessed, and directed according to human will and imagination. The fire circles that once gathered our ancestors around, shared flames to exchange stories and preserve knowledge, have evolved into the global networks of communication and education that now connect human minds across continents and cultures, creating forms of collective intelligence and collaborative awareness that would have seemed magical to our torch-bearing ancestors, yet which somehow fulfill the promise implicit in their first experiments with shared consciousness and communal learning. The internet, social media, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, all of these represent extensions and elaborations of the fundamental breakthrough that occurred when human beings first learned to use external tools to amplify and extend the capabilities of individual consciousness. The shadow play that captivated our ancestors around ancient fires has blossomed into the sophisticated visual media that now shape human culture and imagination. From cinema and television to video games and augmented reality experiences that create immersive worlds of meaning and possibility that exist only in the interplay between consciousness and technology. The cave paintings that recorded the visions and insights of prehistoric artists have evolved into the vast digital galleries and creative platforms that allow contemporary humans to share their inner experiences with audiences spanning the globe, creating new forms of artistic expression and cultural dialogue that transcend the limitations of geography, language, and time. Yet, as we marvel at the technological achievements that define modern civilization, we must also acknowledge that many of the deepest insights and most profound capabilities discovered by our fire-using ancestors remain as relevant and necessary today as they were tens of thousands of years ago. The ability to work together cooperatively, to share resources and knowledge for the common good, to maintain hope and determination in the face of seemingly impossible challenges, to preserve what is most valuable through periods of disruption and change, to find meaning and purpose in the midst of uncertainty and struggle. All of these essentially human qualities were forged in the crucible of prehistoric experience and continue to determine whether human communities thrive or merely survive in the face of contemporary challenges. The catastrophic events that tested our ancestors' resilience and adaptability find their modern parallels in the environmental, social, and technological challenges that now confront human civilization, from climate change and resource depletion to social inequality, and the potential risks posed by artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies that reshape the fundamental conditions of human existence at an accelerating pace. The lessons learned by our fire-tending ancestors about the importance of preparation, cooperation, and the preservation of essential knowledge remain as crucial today as they were during the darkest periods of prehistory, reminding us that the survival and flourishing of human consciousness depends not just on technological capability, but on the deeper qualities of wisdom, compassion, and understanding that enable communities to work together effectively and care for one another during times of stress and uncertainty. The memory of how our ancestors preserved their most essential knowledge through periods of catastrophic disruption offers valuable guidance for contemporary efforts to safeguard human culture and wisdom against the various threats that could disrupt our current technological and social systems. The redundant preservation strategies, the distributed networks of knowledge keepers, the deep understanding of what truly matters for human survival and flourishing, all of these insights from our prehistoric past may prove essential as we navigate the complex challenges of an increasingly interconnected and rapidly changing world. The spiritual and philosophical insights that emerged from humanity's early relationship with fire continue to illuminate contemporary questions about the nature of consciousness, the meaning of existence, and our responsibilities as conscious beings in a vast and mysterious universe. The recognition that consciousness represents something precious and unprecedented in the known cosmos, something worth preserving and protecting and nurturing toward ever greater complexity and capability, echoes through modern science, philosophy, and spirituality, as we grapple with questions about the future evolution of intelligence and awareness in an age of rapidly advancing technology. The fire circles, where our ancestors first learned to share their inner experiences through story, song, and symbolic representation, have evolved into the democratic institutions, educational systems, and cultural organizations that now serve as the forums for collective decision-making and the preservation of human values and wisdom. The egalitarian principles that emerged from prehistoric gatherings around shared flames continue to inspire movements for social justice, human rights, and the expansion of opportunities for all people to participate fully in the ongoing creation of human culture and civilization. As we look toward the future, we can see how the fundamental pattern established by our torch-bearing ancestors continues to drive human development as each new generation builds upon the achievements of those who came before, pushing the boundaries of the possible ever further outward, expanding the reach and influence of consciousness throughout the universe. The space exploration programs that carry human artifacts and messages toward distant stars, the scientific research projects that probe the deepest mysteries of reality, the artistic and cultural initiatives that explore new forms of beauty and meaning, all of these represent contemporary expressions of the same restless curiosity and creative ambition that drove our ancestors to carry fire into unexplored caves and unknown territories. The development of artificial intelligence and machine learning systems represents perhaps the most profound continuation of the pattern established by our fire-using ancestors, as we create external tools that can augment and extend human cognitive capabilities in ways that our prehistoric ancestors could never have imagined, yet which somehow fulfill the promise implicit in their first experiments with technology as a means of transcending natural limitations. The ethical and philosophical questions raised by the emergence of artificial consciousness echo the fundamental challenges faced by our ancestors as they learned to harness and direct natural forces, requiring the same careful balance between ambition and wisdom, innovation and responsibility that has characterized human technological development throughout history. Just as our ancestors had to learn to work with fire rather than being consumed by it, to harness its power while respecting its potential for destruction, we too must learn to develop and deploy artificial intelligence in ways that enhance rather than diminish human capability and well-being. The wisdom that our fire-tending ancestors developed about the importance of maintaining human agency and community connection while using powerful tools may prove essential as we navigate the challenges and opportunities presented by increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligence systems. The environmental challenges that now confront human civilization require the same kind of fundamental shift in thinking and behavior that occurred when our ancestors first learned to work with natural forces rather than simply reacting to them, demanding new forms of understanding about the relationships between human activity and natural systems, new technologies for living sustainably within the Earth's ecological limits, and new social and economic structures that prioritize long-term well-being over short-term advantage. As we contemplate the extraordinary journey that has brought human consciousness from huddling around scattered fires in prehistoric darkness to launching rockets toward distant stars and creating artificial intelligences that may one day surpass human cognitive capabilities, we begin to understand that we are not merely observers of this story, but active participants in its ongoing unfolding, inheritors of the torch that was first lit by our ancestors millions of years ago, and charged with the responsibility of carrying that flame forward into an uncertain but infinitely promising future. The light that burns within human consciousness, the spark of awareness and creativity and wonder that distinguishes our species from all other known forms of life, represents one of the most remarkable phenomena in the known universe, a development so extraordinary and unprecedented that it challenges our understanding of what is possible within the laws of physics and the constraints of natural evolution. The preservation and nurturing of this consciousness, its protection from the forces that would diminish or destroy it, its cultivation toward ever greater wisdom and capability and compassion represents perhaps the most important responsibility that any generation of human beings has ever faced. This responsibility extends beyond the mere survival of our species to encompass the continued evolution and refinement of consciousness itself, the ongoing development of human capabilities for understanding, creativity, and compassion that began when our ancestors first gathered around fires to share their inner experiences and explore the mysteries of existence. Each generation inherits not just the technological achievements of those who came before, but also the deeper mission of expanding the boundaries of what consciousness can achieve, of pushing the frontiers of awareness and understanding ever further into the unknown territories of possibility. In the end, the story of the first torch is also the story of every human being who has ever lived. Every moment of awareness that has illuminated the darkness of ignorance, every act of creativity that has brought something new into existence, every expression of love and compassion that has connected one consciousness to another across the apparent boundaries of individual existence. We are all torchbearers in this ancient and ongoing human adventure, carriers of the flame of consciousness that our ancestors first kindled in the darkness of prehistoric night, guardians of the light that has grown from a single flickering flame to the brilliant illumination of human civilization that now reaches toward the stars themselves. As you settle into the quiet peace that follows our long journey together through deep time, allow yourself to feel the connection that links you to those first firebearers who stepped boldly into the unknown darkness of prehistory, carrying nothing but their courage, their curiosity, and their precious flames to light the way forward into an uncertain but infinitely promising future. Their legacy lives on in every choice you make, to learn rather than remain ignorant, to create rather than destroy, to connect rather than isolate, to hope rather than despair, to kindle the flame of understanding in others rather than allowing the darkness of ignorance and fear to prevail. The torch they lit still burns within you, waiting to be shared with others who seek light in the darkness, wisdom in the midst of confusion, and meaning in the face of uncertainty. In every moment of genuine curiosity, every act of creative expression, every gesture of compassion and understanding, every effort to build rather than tear down, you participate in the continuing story that began when consciousness first learned to hold fire in its hands and push back against the forces of darkness and limitation. The story continues, and you are its author, carrying forward the eternal flame of human becoming into whatever challenges and opportunities await us in the vast unknown that stretches ahead. Take a moment to feel the warmth of that flame within you, and know that you are never alone in carrying this light, for you are connected across time and space to all who have carried the torch before you and all who will carry it after you are gone. The light grows brighter when it is shared, and the story grows richer when each voice adds its unique note to the great symphony of human consciousness, awakening to itself and to the infinite possibilities that await.